This is the second last week of the current Christian year. We call it Year C in the biz. It's the year that we look at Luke. Starting in a couple of weeks with Advent, we're going to move to our new year, and it's going to be looking at the gospel through the lens of Matthew. Matthew is a very different take on it than Luke. Luke, again, is the social justice gospel, the get out and get it done gospel. My personal favorite. I always love preaching through the year of Luke. We have a scripture this morning that is a little bit of a challenge. It's one of those things that reminds us that when we're listening to scripture, when we're reading scripture, that we have to keep those three time periods in focus. When the story happened, when the story was told, and who we are today and how we hear it. So today's story talks about Jesus sitting. This is a story actually comes through in what we understand as Holy Week. He's sitting across from the temple, just to position it. He's done the whole palm parade, and everybody's excited to have him there. He's sitting across the valley, essentially, looking at the temple, and he just muses and he says, all these rocks are going to be destroyed, and eventually, after 3 days, God will build it up again. Now, we know that it is a metaphor. The writing period time of around 90 CE knew it was a metaphor. The people in the original experience would not have known it was a metaphor. So for them, it was fantastical that this incredible temple that they're so dedicated to is going to be destroyed. And it's not that it hasn't been destroyed before. It has. This is the second temple. But it's the concept that it's going to be destroyed in their lifetime, that in their short lifetime, that and then raised up again. It's not logical. Of course, we understand it's talking about Jesus being the temple and Jesus rising from the dead. We get all that in hindsight. But those who are in the story and the experience to begin with would not have been able to put those into places. The scripture goes on to talk about how the disciples then want signs. And that's a very human thing. Tell us how to prepare. I had a couple of things going on today. One was recording the Preacher and the Pagan podcast. Another one was a friend stopping by. They let me know. And in this day of digital technology, I can know right up until the minute when they're almost on my door. It's just taken for granted that we will all have signs of something impending, that we can forecast weather, that we can know when someone's going to show up because they'll tell us. We can set a date, and technology will connect us to people across vast distances. Not a world they celebrated or they experienced, of course, 2,000 years ago, but the need to have that connection, to have that forewarning, to know how to be prepared is ageless. That's all they were asking for. And it's a very simple ask, but again, detracts completely from the point Jesus was trying to make, that there is no warning. You cannot read the news and say, oh, okay, here it's coming. And there have been so many who've tried. I think we're in the middle right now of someone else who predicted the end of the world and it didn't quite happen, so they've got to backtrack and shift, and I don't know. I don't follow along with it. It's on endless repeat, quite frankly, these people who are sure they know because they're reading the signs. Jesus was very specific about that. He said the signs you're reading are not the signs of war and famine and nations rising and nations falling. That's going to happen all the time. And this is an awareness we have in retrospective. 2,000 years later, we can look at history and see how nations have risen and fallen. We might be in the middle of one right now going on, a destruction of a nation that we thought was never ending, who kind of was on top of that whole thing. But no nation is. And hunger, wars, tsunamis, earthquakes, all of these things are constantly happening. And we know about it. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to just kind of dismiss as not a sign. But Jesus says specifically that's going to happen. That's going to happen. And we're going to have fighting between families. And we're going to have people turning each other in to the authorities. That's going to happen. Now, that was a lived reality of the first century. We don't have the large persecution of Christians that I would have been taught as a child, and so many of you might have been. But there were sporadic places, and there was definitely a Roman desire to kind of stop the cult of social and radical change that Jesus represented. So all of that stuff was lived reality. None of the things, quite frankly, are predictions. They're just looking back on the pattern of life. And Jesus says that's not the signs. That's not what you're wanting to look for. That's not how this is all going to come about. And then he starts talking about being ready, being in the place, being prepared. And that's such a hard thing to do because, again, we are bombarded with images of military being ready to when the signal comes, or lineups being ready to tackle. So we've got all of those images that we've got to kind of counter, because Jesus is telling us none of that is the readiness that we're looking for. It's not our bodily readiness. It's our spiritual readiness, our place in our own journey that we have to make ready. We have to, and we've gone through an entire group of stories now, the past couple of months, about making right relationships with each other, about making right relationships and being in the place where we can hear God. Now, this is not about making right relationships with God. That's already a given. And this whole bit about God doesn't think we're good enough, that's crap. That's not part of the message that Jesus gave us at all. But this brokenness in society. And Jesus said, yeah, it's going to happen. But don't look for it to happen. Heal as many of those wounds as possible. Get as many of those connections back as you possibly can. Because the thing is that the new world they're waiting for is not this thing in another plane of existence. That's also garbage theology. Understandable at a time when people didn't understand science the way we do now, or geography, or any of that kind of stuff, but not something we can sustain today. This new reality, this thing that Jesus is preparing everybody for, where all of these bits of destruction and damage are going to happen first, well, it's just our lived reality, is a place here where we finally learn how to live in peace. We finally start to take care of each other. We finally start to hear the voices of the voiceless. We feed the people who need to be fed. The abundance of earth is no longer hoarded by a few, but spread out to be enjoyed by everyone. That is the world that we're waiting for and preparing for and waiting for the signs for, that we will be there. It's not the catastrophe that humans naturally understand when huge change happens. It's the message we have to hear, especially in this political reality we are in 2025, where who knows which megalomaniac is going to go off the rails and do God knows what. We have to, in the middle of all of that, have hope. Last week was Remembrance Day here in Canada, where we remember, it's a Commonwealth practice where we remember the sacrifices of World War I, World War II, the Korean War, even though Canada didn't participate in the Vietnam War and Afghanistan and other conflicts. And in the core of that is a thank you for those who willingly put themselves forward, and a lot were killed, to make it better for everyone else. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at this point in time. Who are we, and where are we going to put ourselves, position ourselves, ready ourselves for when these changes started to happen? I was telling the congregation last week that my daughter, 27 this year, who has felt quite despondent with society, which is a general Gen Z thing, said for the first time, she told me this back close to Easter, she said, for the first time I've got hope, because it actually feels like we're getting ready to do something. That's the kind of sign, if we need it. She's lived her entire life being very well aware of the news, being very well aware of the gospel, being very well aware of what it means to help people. And she said for the first time she feels hope because it feels like a getting ready. That is where those people were, those followers were, back with Jesus on the hill. There was a sense of something was about to shift, something is about to change. Getting ready for that is not hunkering down and waiting for the apocalypse. It is being available for the Spirit of God to work through us. Yesterday, I was walking through a parking lot, and this man came up to me, and he asked for food, or money actually, originally. And it's 2025. Who carries change anymore? So I bought him a meal, and he was very grateful, and it made me feel better to be able to feed this one person this one meal at this one time. It's not in my capacity to be able to feed everybody that is in need all the time, but I could do this one thing for one person at one moment. And that's the kind of being ready that we're talking about. I was ready to be able to be helpful. I had the resources available to me. I had the time available to me. I had the ear to listen. I watched other people put him off because they were not able to hear what he had to say as a very simple request. This is the kind of ready we're asked to be, ready and waiting for moments. And eventually those moments will build up. We have been trained by Hollywood to wait for these huge disaster moments. Real life disasters aren't even in moments, they're build-ups. And this is where we're asked to be, the build up to something better that is coming. But part of the building is our responsibility to participate. And scripture will say, and it will happen. This will tear families apart. Jesus is not fooling anybody about this. And it has, and it will continue to. People will not understand why this new passion to help others is so forceful in someone when it's never been there before. But they found this kind of inner renewal in their faith. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Being there, being ready, and being able to act. And I got to tell you, when you do that, the dividends, the returns, the benefit you get is so much better. Now imagine if everybody did their part. We would be so much closer to the arrival of this new world that we have been promised for so long, that we've been working together for so long. When Jesus sat on that hill talking with his followers, they were talking something tangible that they could see, a temple in the distance. By the time Luke was writing this gospel, the temple had been destroyed 20, 30 years before he had been writing. So it's not a matter of predicting, it had already happened. Jesus' resurrection had already happened. It was there. But it's setting the stage, and that's all that was doing. A temporal, a physical thing, one thing, is not going to be what sets all of this off. It is our communal helping each other, being there for each other, insisting the resources are there for each other, for everyone involved. That will make this new world happen. And it will not be one issue. It will not be one big fanfare. It's going to be a collective building. But we got to be ready. And we got to be able to grab the moments when they come. And I promise you, when you open yourselves, the moments are there.